Hey friends, tonight we're diving into what dating was like in the Victorian era. Between 1837 and 1901, millions of young people stumbled through the minefield of Victorian courtship, a world of rigid rules, secret codes, and the looming threat of social ruin if you made one wrong move. The stakes were impossibly high, but somehow, people still managed to flirt, fall in love, and even marry, without collapsing under the weight of sheer embarrassment. So, let's rewind to see what dating was really like in the Victorian era. Quick note before we dive in, if you listen to these regularly, hit like or subscribe. And I'm genuinely curious, where are you tuning in from, and what time is it there? Always wild to think someone's sipping coffee in London while I'm recording this in the middle of the night in the States. Alright, back to London, 1862. Trust me, you'll want to be cozy for this one. Grab a blanket, settle in. It's 6:15 in the morning, and you're about to wake up as 19-year-old Eleanor Hartwell. Your eyes blink open to the dim grey light sneaking through heavy damask curtains. The first thing you feel? The cold. Forget memory foam mattresses and fluffy duvets. You're lying on a horsehair mattress, lumpy in all the worst places. The sheets are damp from the London fog creeping through poorly insulated windows. You dare to stick one arm out from under the woolen blanket and immediately regret it. The air bites like ice water. Your breath turns to little clouds above the bed. The only heat left is from last night's fire, now nothing more than a faint orange glow. Miss Eleanor, are you awake, miss? The door creaks open. Your maid, Martha, slips in, balancing a pitcher of lukewarm water. She's already been up for hours hauling it up 3 flights of stairs. Your mother says today's the day, miss. The Chamberlain dinner party. And just like that, your stomach plummets. Tonight is no ordinary dinner, it's your official introduction to London society. The start of your first season. The beginning of the Victorian marriage market. Martha, you whisper. I think I'm going to be sick. Now, miss. Every young lady feels that way. But your mama says you're ready, and ready you'll be. Unlike modern dating, where you might swipe right in pajamas or awkwardly chat at a cafe, Victorian courtship is basically a high-stakes sport, with your reputation on the line. One false step and you don't just embarrass yourself, you risk your entire family standing. Martha, as she pours water into the wash basin, adds, Mr. Thornfield might be there tonight. The one with 2,000 a year. She gives you a knowing smile. That's the thing, courtship isn't just about romance. It's about money, lineage, connections. And everyone is watching. For years, your mother has drilled you in survival tactics, how to make conversation that's neither dull nor too clever, how to hold cutlery through 12 endless courses, how to dance without looking like you're enjoying it, how to flash just enough ankle to intrigue, but not enough to ruin yourself. Breakfast doesn't help your nerves. Your father hides behind his newspaper while your mother quizzes you on the eligible bachelors you must remember. The Chamberlain's second son is in trade, don't encourage him. The eldest, however, has prospects. The Darlington boy, poor conversationalist, excellent family. And if Mr. Thornfield is present, for heaven's sake, don't look eager. You nibble toast without tasting it. Unlike today, when you can casually text, coffee at 3. Victorian courtship is a game of chess, where you're not even allowed to touch the pieces. And then comes preparation. Forget a quick shower and outfit change, this takes 4 hours. A tepid rosewater bath, just long enough to chase the chill from your bones. Then the layering begins. First, the chemise. Then drawers, yes, open-crotch drawers, because 17 layers and chamber pots require efficiency. Then comes the corset. Forget the lacy lingerie store version. This is a steel-boned vice. Deep breath, miss," Martha warns as you grab the bedpost. She pulls. Your ribs crush inward, your lungs reduce to half their capacity. She pulls tighter. By the time she's satisfied, your waist is unnaturally tiny, your posture locked upright, and you can only take shallow breaths. And you're still not finished. Over it goes the crinoline, steel hoops forming a cage around your body so your skirt can bloom into that iconic bell shape. It knocks against chairs and door frames, announcing your presence before you enter a room. Petticoat after petticoat piles on until you're carrying an extra 15 pounds of fabric. Finally, the blue silk dress your mother insists upon, tight, gleaming, suffocating. Hair is next. No messy bun here. Curls, pins, hot irons, carefully sculpted into something elegant but modest. An hour later, you're powdered, rouged, just enough to glow, not enough to look fast. By the time you're declared ready, you're cinched, padded, weighed down, and polished within an inch of your life. Tonight, you'll step into a ballroom where every smile, every glance, every slip of conversation is part of a performance. Welcome to Victorian dating. Hair pinned, gloves buttoned, reticule ready. You're already exhausted, and the evening hasn't even begun. You look beautiful, Elelenina, your mother says as you descend the stairs. Her voice carries genuine pride, and for a fleeting moment, warmth blooms in your chest. This is what she has prepared you for all your life. Your father closes his pocket watch, studying you with a smile. "My girl's all grown up," he says, and beneath his pride you catch something else, sadness. Tonight marks the beginning of the end. Once you find a husband, you'll no longer be his to protect. That's the Victorian way. The carriage ride to the Chamberlain's townhouse is silent. Gas lamps blur past the windows, your stomach tight with the thought that one of the men you meet tonight might, by season's end, become your husband. Not a boyfriend. Not, "Let's see where this goes." Husband. The townhouse blazes with light. Footmen in livery usher guests toward the entrance. Your father offers his hand to help you down, careful not to crease your gown. "Chin up," your mother whispers. "And for heaven's sake, no talk of those books you're always reading. Men don't want a blue stocking." You breathe as deeply as your corset allows and step into the lion's den. The Chamberlain's drawing room is already crowded. Perfume and cologne hang in the air, mingled with the subtle scent of wealth. Chandeliers scatter light across jeweled hair combs and silken gowns. Everywhere, people are watching each other. Mrs. Hartwell, Miss Hartwell, Mrs. Chamberlain greets you with a smile sharp as porcelain. "Delighted you could come." And the dance begins. Your mother steers you through the crowd like a general on campaign, maneuvering for the best introductions. You curtsy, smile, answer politely, laugh just enough, while never, ever meeting a gentleman's eyes directly. "Miss Hartwell, may I present Mr. James Thornfield?" A tall man with dark hair bows. "This is the one your mother mentioned, £2,000 a year and excellent family connections." "A pleasure, Miss Hartwell." "The pleasure is mine," you reply automatically, curtsying low. And just like that, your first exchange with a possible future husband is complete. He moves on, and you're swept elsewhere. No witty banter, no lingering glance across candlelight. Victorian introductions were brief, formal, and closely supervised. If he's interested, he'll request a call on your family. Alone time? Unthinkable. Dinner is announced, and another test begins. Seating is arranged by rank. You're relieved when your escort is the host's son, respectable middle placement, not humiliatingly low or presumptuously high. The dining room dazzles, polished silver, crystal stemware, and so many forks and knives it feels like a trap. Across from you sits Mr. Thornfield. Occasionally he glances your way. In your mind, you panic, "This is how I die. by drinking from the wrong glass. The first course arrives, clear soup. You carefully select the correct spoon and sip delicately from the side. Success. Only 11 more courses to survive. Do you enjoy music, Miss Hartwell? Mr. Thornfield's voice carries across the table. Every head nearby turns toward you. This is a test. Too much enthusiasm? You'll look desperate. Too little? Uncultured. I appreciate fine music, sir, you say carefully. Though I play only moderately well. He nods, satisfied. Perhaps you'll play for us later. Your stomach sinks. Performing before strangers is a dreaded ritual, but refusal isn't an option. If Mrs. Chamberlain wishes it, I would be honored, you reply. Across the table, your mother inclines her head. Another hurdle cleared. Course follows endless course. Soup to fish, fish to meat, meat to game. Gentlemen drink freely, ladies sip sparingly. You are painfully aware of every motion, back rigid, elbows tucked, bites dainty, chewing silent. Food is not food, it's theater. By the 10th course you're suffocating under fabric, corset, and expectation. After dinner, the ladies retreat to the drawing room while the men linger over port and cigars. Your mother leans close, whispering, "You did well with Mr. Thornfield. He was watching you." A flutter stirs in your chest, something between dread and hope. He seemed more interesting than most. But is that enough? When the gentlemen return, Mrs. Chamberlain does indeed ask you to play. You smooth your skirts, sit at the pianoforte, and perform the piece you've practiced countless times. Competent, but nothing dazzling. Mr. Thornfield stands at your side, quietly turning pages. "You play with feeling, Miss Hartwell," he says softly. "That matters more than perfection." The compliment surprises you. It's not the usual empty flattery. "You are kind," you murmur. "Not kind," he corrects, his voice gentle. "Honest. Do you enjoy reading as well as music?" Your mother's warning echoes in your mind. Don't reveal too much. But his expression feels genuine, inviting. "Yes," you say. "Very much." His eyes brighten. "Then we must discuss books sometime. Perhaps when I call on your family." Your heart leaps, though your face remains composed. "My parents receive visitors on Tuesday afternoons." He bows, smiling faintly, and moves away. The entire exchange lasts less than 2 minutes. Yet it's enough to set the machinery of courtship in motion. Hours later, back home, Martha unlaces your corset. The sudden rush of breath feels like life itself. "Well, miss? How was it?" she asks. You think of the stairs, the strain, the suffocating weight of performance. Then you think of his words about books. "It was a beginning," you whisper. In your modern bed, you might text after a date, "Had fun tonight." In Victorian London, there is only silence, speculation, and waiting. No profile to check. No instant reply. Just 3 long days before Tuesday. And as Eleanina drifts into uneasy sleep, she wonders whether honesty has just opened the smallest crack in the wall of expectation, or whether she's already made a mistake. The cook had prepared delicate cakes and biscuits, while Eleanina's father had been firmly banished to his club for the afternoon. Morning calls, after all, were the territory of women. "Your green day dress, I think," her mother decided after breakfast, with the modest lace collar. Fashionable, but not too showy. Martha dressed Eleanina with particular care. The green dress, lighter than her dinner gown but still layered with corset and petticoats, fell neatly into place. Her hair was arranged simply, with soft curls framing her face, the Victorian equivalent of "I woke up like this." "You look lovely," Martha said, stepping back to admire her work. Not too eager, but pretty enough to catch any gentleman's eye. That was the balance every young woman had to master: attractive but not vain, accomplished but never threatening, interested without seeming forward. Modern dating had its pitfalls, certainly, but at least one could text "had fun last night" without risking scandal. By 2 o'clock, Elelenina sat in the drawing room with her mother, embroidery hoop in hand, stomach tight with nerves. The hoop gave her hands something to do, though its real purpose was symbolic, an occupation she could set aside gracefully when visitors arrived. Keep conversation light, her mother reminded her for the 10th time. The weather, music, perhaps art, if he seems cultured. Nothing controversial. Yes, mother, Elelenina murmured, pricking her finger with the needle. A drop of blood welled up. Quickly, she dabbed it with her handkerchief. Blood on embroidery might be read as carelessness, and no Victorian husband wanted a careless wife. The clock ticked. 3 came and went. Nothing. Her hopes began to sink. Perhaps she had misread Mr. Thornfield's interest, or worse, confirmed her mother's suspicion that gentlemen disliked bookish women. Then, at precisely 3:45, the bell rang. Both women froze, exchanged a glance, then bent studiously back to their stitches. Eagerness was the cardinal sin of courtship. A lady never rushed. That was why God had made butlers. Harrison appeared with a silver tray. "Mr. James Thornfield," he announced. Mrs. Hartwell inclined her head. "We will receive him." Now, in case you're wondering, yes, that little rectangle of card was a big deal. Calling cards were the original social network. To leave one was to request entry into a home. Mrs. Hartwell might have had Harrison politely refuse him with the phrase "not at home." Instead, she accepted, the first small victory in the courtship dance. Mr. Thornfield entered with a bow. "Mrs. Hartwell, Miss Hartwell. I hope I find you well." "Quite well, thank you. Please sit down." He took the chair across from them, close enough for conversation, but at the properly respectable distance. Every placement in a drawing room carried meaning. "We are so pleased you could call," Mrs. Hartwell said smoothly. "Elelenina, dear, perhaps you might pour the tea." This, too, was a test. Elelenina carried the heavy silver teapot to the table, her hands steady. "How do you take your tea, Mr. Thornfield?" "A touch of milk, no sugar, thank you." She passed the cup without their fingers brushing. Anything else would have been scandalously forward. He watched her closely, interest flickering in his eyes. Her mother began with the required weather talk. Mr. Thornfield replied politely, and for 15 minutes the conversation flowed between him and Mrs. Hartwell, safe topics, mutual acquaintances, last night's concert. Then came her cue. "My daughter was much impressed by the Chamberlain's selections," her mother prompted. "The Mozart was particularly well chosen," Elelenina said carefully. Mr. Thornfield's expression brightened. "Do you enjoy Mozart, Miss Hartwell?" "I do," she said, concealing her real enthusiasm beneath polite modesty. "As do I. Though I confess a preference for Beethoven's Passion." He glanced at Mrs. Hartwell for approval. She inclined her head. Permission granted. "And what of literature, Miss Hartwell?" he asked, returning to a question from the dinner party. Elelenina hesitated. Her mother's warnings rang in her ears, but Mr. Thornfield's earnest expression emboldened her. "I recently finished The Mill on the Floss," she admitted. "Risky." Contemporary novels, especially by George Eliot, weren't considered safely improving for young women. "George Eliot has remarkable insight into human nature," he said, eyes alight. "Though I found the ending tragic. Do you prefer happier conclusions, Miss Hartwell?" Before she could answer, Mrs. Hartwell intervened. "My daughter has always had a fondness for poetry. Perhaps you might recommend something uplifting, Mr. Thornfield." And just like that, the waters were steered back to safety. Eleanina shot him an apologetic glance. He returned the faintest smile. After precisely half an hour, the correct length for a first call, Mr. Thornfield stood. "Mrs. Hartwell, Miss Hartwell, thank you for your hospitality. Might I have the pleasure of calling again next week? We are at home on Tuesdays and Thursdays," Mrs. Hartwell replied with the formula that neither promised nor refused. When he had gone, her mother gave a satisfied nod. "Promising. His manners are impeccable. Only, my dear, remember not to appear too learned. Gentlemen appreciate refinement, not blue-stocking tendencies." Eleanina nodded, but inwardly she replayed the moment his eyes had brightened at her mention of George Eliot. Perhaps not every gentleman feared an intelligent wife. The next day brought more calling cards: Mr. Darlington, Mr. Peters, Mr. Sullivan. Word had spread that she had made a favorable impression. The season was moving briskly. And yet, when Tuesday arrived again, Eleanina found herself most eager for Mr. Thornfield's visit. This time, she chose her own dress, a blue-green that made her eyes shine brighter than the plain green her mother had selected before. "That's rather bright for morning calls," Mrs. Hartwell remarked, eyeing the blue-green gown her daughter had chosen. "It's my favorite color," Eleanina replied quietly. Her mother sighed. "Very well. But keep your conversation light today. Mr. Thornfield seemed far too interested in your thoughts on literature last time. As if that were a flaw. By modern standards, a man caring about a woman's opinions is the bare minimum. But in Victorian England, such interest was unusual, perhaps even unsettling to tradition. When Mr. Thornfield arrived at precisely the same time as before, Eleanina noticed with a quickening pulse that he carried a small wrapped parcel. "After the ritual greetings and the careful pouring of tea," he said, "Mrs. Hartwell, I hope you'll forgive the liberty. I brought a volume I thought Miss Hartwell might enjoy." He presented it, of course, to her mother first. Proper etiquette demanded that all gifts pass through the chaperone. Mrs. Hartwell unwrapped the paper slowly, revealing a newly published slim volume of Tennyson's Enoch Arden and other poems. "How thoughtful," she said, before passing it along. Eleanina accepted the book with controlled composure. "Thank you, Mr. Thornfield. This is most kind. I've marked a few passages I found particularly moving," he added. "But I'd value your thoughts on the whole work." For a man to request her genuine opinions was almost scandalously intimate. "I shall read it carefully," she promised. Their eyes met, a brief spark of understanding before she turned away under her mother's watchful gaze. The visit followed the usual rhythm: weather, music, social news, but her mother allowed the topic of literature to linger a fraction longer than before. Then, casually, she turned the conversation toward the upcoming Thornton ball. "You're acquainted with the Thorntons, are you not, Mr. Thornfield?" "Indeed. Sir William and I share business interests. Their ball is always a highlight." "My daughter has just received her invitation," Mrs. Hartwell said with satisfaction. "Perhaps you might request a dance? Forward, even for her." "It would be my honor," he replied, glancing at Eleanina. "If Miss Hartwell would grant me the kindness of reserving me a place upon her card." "I should be delighted," Eleanina answered, the formal words hiding the flutter in her chest. As he prepared to leave, Mr. Thornfield added, "Mrs. Hartwell, might I escort you and Miss Hartwell to the Phillips Musicale on Friday evening? A smaller gathering, I believe, but one we are all invited to." This was no small step. An escort in public meant serious intent. Mrs. Hartwell's smile confirmed her approval. "We would be most pleased." After he left, her mother nearly glowed. An escort to a musicale. A promised dance at the Thornton Ball. These are not casual attentions. Later, in her room, Eleanor lit a candle and opened the Tennyson. Tiny pencil dots marked select passages, beautiful lines about courage and freedom, about daring to look beyond society's constraints. Easily erased, leaving no trace for critical eyes. Clever man. Was he sending her a message? Or was she reading too much into it? She pressed the book to her chest, thinking of his quiet gaze, and drifted to sleep with poetry at her pillow. Victorian courtship was glacial, smothered by rules and rituals. But within that rigid framework, small gestures carried enormous weight. A marked book, a glance, the brush of gloved fingers, all of it thrilling in ways modern texting could never quite capture. By Friday evening, the Phillips musicale marked her first public appearance with Mr. Thornfield as escort. Her mother rehearsed every detail once more. Show animation during the music, but not too much. A gentle smile, nothing more. And your fan, remember what I've told you. The fan, delicate ivory lace, innocent looking but potent. It carried its own hidden language. Opened slowly, one meaning. Snap shut, another. Drawn across the cheek? A confession of love, strictly forbidden. In a society where every word was overheard, fans were a secret vocabulary of the heart. And, as Eleanor was about to discover, flowers spoke just as clearly. Might be nothing, miss, Martha said as she laid out the morning gown, but Mr. Darlington's been asking questions about you in the servants' hall. Wants to know your habits, your preferences. More than the usual polite curiosity, if you take my meaning. That was concerning. The servant network in Victorian London was an invisible web of whispers and influence. Below stairs, information flowed more quickly than above, and any gentleman probing too deeply into a young lady's life risked looking both indiscreet and desperate. "Thank you, Martha," Eleanor said, forcing a calm she didn't entirely feel. "I'll be cautious around him." Later, alone, her gaze fell on the bouquet Thornfield had sent. Arranged carefully in a glass vase by her bed, the flowers had begun to droop, their florographic message fading with their freshness. But the charm tied around their stems was permanent. She unfastened it and secured it to the tassel of her fan. At the Thornton Ball, when she carried that fan, Mr. Thornfield would see the charm and know she had received, and accepted, his unspoken words. As she drifted to sleep that night, the thought made her heart race. In just a matter of days, their courtship had accelerated from stiff drawing-room pleasantries to secret gifts, coded messages, and glances that carried more meaning than entire conversations. They were using society's own tools of propriety, fans, flowers, calling cards, as a language of rebellion, a way to say what they were forbidden to speak. Now, from your modern vantage point, you might think, why not just say what you feel? Why the elaborate dance of signals? But the truth is, there was power in the restraint. A glance, a phrase, a flower meant more precisely because nothing was casual. In a world of instant messages and swiping right, perhaps we've lost that delicious weight, that sharp thrill of anticipation. The Victorians may have carried it to absurd extremes, but they understood this. What is difficult to win is often more deeply cherished. Sleep well, Eleanor thought as she closed her eyes. Tomorrow the world would see only a polite young lady. But tucked in her fan was a secret as intimate as a kiss. The week before the Thornton Ball was a blur of preparation. It wasn't just another social event, it was the event of the season, the place where reputations were forged or shattered under the chandeliers. "Your dance card must be properly managed," Mrs. Hartwell instructed 3 mornings before the ball, her tone brisk as she buttered her toast. "No more than 2 dances with any gentleman. Even Mr. Thornfield. Even though he escorted us to the Phillips soiree?" Elelenina asked, startled. Especially because of that, her mother replied, eyes sharp. Society already notes his particular attentions. To dance more than twice would suggest an understanding exists between you. And in Victorian code, that meant everyone would assume they were all but engaged, without a single formal word spoken. Modern couples update their status online. Victorians let the number of dances speak volumes. Elelenina pushed at her toast, appetite gone. And Mr. Darlington? He's called 3 times now. His family connections are impeccable, her mother said firmly. You would do well to encourage him. Encourage him? The very thought made her stomach twist. But in her mother's eyes, the marriage market outweighed personal preference. Suitors were to be weighed like investments, reliable, respectable, and profitable. The morning of the Thornton ball dawned with unexpected sunshine filtering through London's haze. Elelenina awoke early, nerves too sharp for sleep. Tonight would be different. No stiff drawing room tea service, no clipped conversations. Tonight she would dance with Mr. Thornfield, their steps weaving close within patterns of music and light. Proper, yes, but still closer than any drawing room allowed. You're awake already, miss, Martha said, entering with steaming water. She grinned knowingly. Excited for tonight, are we? Anxious might be nearer the truth, Elelenina admitted. Well, lucky for you, we've your best gown ready. You'll outshine them all, Martha declared. If you don't mind me saying so. Preparations for a ball made a dinner party look like a casual supper. Hair to be dressed, gloves to be pressed, jewels selected, shoes softened just enough for dancing. Elelenina's whole household seemed to buzz with the urgency of her coming debut into the season's true spotlight. And when night fell, beneath chandeliers and music, the rules of Victorian romance would shift from the parlor to the dance floor. Preparations for the ball were anything but casual. Elelenina devoted her entire day to readiness, not from vanity, but because Victorian beauty demanded it. The ritual began with a bath, fragrant with French milled rose soap, followed by the rare ordeal of washing her hair. In an age without dryers, the process meant hours stationed by the fire, hair spread out in damp coils, dried slowly with patience and heat. Lunch was little more than a nibble. Tonight, her corset would be laced tighter than ever, and there was no room for indulgence. By mid-afternoon, Martha's firm voice cut through the quiet. Arms up, miss. The corset settled around Elelenina's chemise-covered torso. The first tug at the laces drove the air from her lungs. Must it be so tight? She gasped. Ball gowns are cut smaller than day dresses, Martha explained briskly, pulling again. Especially at the waist. By the 6th pull, Elelenina's breaths were shallow, her waist drawn to a perilous narrowness. In 1862, this was beauty, ribs crushed, lungs compressed, fainting an ever-present risk. Next came petticoats, layer upon layer, each heavier and grander than the last, until she felt buried beneath the weight. The final petticoat, unseen by any but her maid, was still trimmed with lace and ribbon. That was Victorian fashion, beauty even in invisibility. At last came the gown itself, pale blue silk with silver embroidery, its neckline lower than her day dresses but modest by modern eyes. Her bare arms, pale and slender, showed in the short sleeves. Martha stepped back, satisfied. You look beautiful, miss. Like something out of a fairy tale. Elelenina turned to the mirror. What looked back was ethereal, pale skin, a sculpted waist, skirts billowing like a cloud, hair woven into elaborate curls studded with tiny silk flowers. When Martha handed her the fan, now adorned with the little silver book charm from Mr. Thornfield, Elelenina's fingers lingered on it. A secret message, hidden in plain sight. Downstairs, Her father looked up from his watch, struck speechless for a moment. "My dear," he said at last, "you're a vision." Her mother's appraisal was sharper. "The neckline sits well. The waist could be tighter, but it will do. Remember your posture all evening, Elelenina, no slouching." As if slouching were possible in this corset. Their carriage rolled toward Thornton House, joining the glittering procession. Gas lamps flared at the entrance, illuminating liveried footmen and ladies stepping delicately from polished vehicles. Music and laughter floated out through the windows, carrying with them the scent of flowers and perfume. Inside, the rules began. A young man asked for her first quadrille. Dance cards filled with names like tactical maps. Her mother whispered, "Balance is everything." Too many familiar partners seemed dull. Too many strangers, improper eagerness. It was exhausting, like navigating a dating app with 300 pages of rules, every misstep threatening social ruin. The ballroom dazzled her, chandeliers scattering prisms of light, an orchestra of 20, flowers heavy with scent. And almost immediately, the games began. Mr. Darlington claimed her first waltz, standing too close, eyes too intent, his compliments edged with something possessive. She endured him with practiced courtesy, but his presence unsettled her. Then came Thornfield. James. In black tailcoat, white waistcoat, his gloves immaculate, and that rebellious curl refusing to stay in place. He bowed, smiled, and in his mother-approved way requested the supper dance and the final waltz, the two most telling choices of the night. Elelenina's pulse quickened as she agreed, and as he signed his name on her card, his glance flicked to the charm on her fan. Just a hint of a smile betrayed his private acknowledgment. The night spun onward in dances and pleasantries, until supper brought the chance for quiet conversation. James fetched her plate, another gesture of attentiveness that propriety rarely allowed, and they dined in a corner, speaking of books, of Tennyson, of ideas that stretched beyond the narrow walls of society's expectations. Later, on the lantern-lit terrace, he at last spoke plainly. "Elelenina," he said softly, the intimacy of her name a tremor in the night air. "I intend to call on your father next week, to request permission to court you formally." Her heart stuttered, then steadied. "I would welcome that," she whispered. The rest of the night blurred, dances ticked away, meaningless conversation flowed, and all she could think of was the promise carried in his words. When the final waltz came, James claimed her hand before all of society's watchful eyes. The music swept them across the floor, intimate despite the formality, and when the last note faded, the look between them sealed everything the evening had led to. Later, at home, her corset finally unlaced and her aching body freed, Elelenina thought of the terrace, of James's intentions, of the future opening before her. Yes, she whispered to Martha's earlier question. It was worth it. The elaborate rituals of Victorian courtship were suffocating, often absurd, but tonight, they had brought her one step closer to something rare, a connection that felt real, even within the strict confines of society. Elelenina's father leaned back into his favorite chair, speaking with the calm certainty of a man satisfied by his own judgment. "He seems a sensible young man. Good head for business. His investments are sound, his property unencumbered. I see no reason to object to the match should it progress further." That was high praise from Robert Hartwell, whose opinions were rarely softened by sentiment. For him, James Thornfield had passed the test of respectability and solvency. Did he mention when he might call again? Elelenina asked, hesitating despite her father's approval. "Tomorrow afternoon," came the reply, his eyes gentler now as they rested on her. "He has asked to take you for a carriage ride in the park. Properly chaperoned, of course." Of course. A carriage ride through Hyde Park was more than a pleasant outing, It was a public declaration of serious intent, a step perilously close to engagement. "That would be lovely," she said, striving for composure. "I shall accompany you," her mother added briskly. "A mother is the most appropriate chaperone." The next day dawned bright and mild, perfect weather for a drive. Eleanina dressed with careful calculation, her second-best day dress, elegant but not extravagant, paired with a bonnet that framed her face without ostentation. Her mother insisted upon the blue parasol. "It flatters your complexion," she declared, not overlooking its secondary use as a discreet instrument of flirtation. James arrived punctually, his open carriage neither flashy nor plain, prosperous but tasteful, much like himself. With proper bows and greetings exchanged, they set out, Eleanina and her mother facing James across the polished seats, propriety preserved. As the carriage rolled into the park, she dared an opening remark. "I trust my father did not intimidate you, Mr. Thornfield?" "On the contrary," James replied smoothly. "Your father is a sensible man, intent upon his daughter's best interests. I respect him for it." The unspoken truth hung in the air, that her father had likely scrutinized every aspect of James's fortune, family, and habits before granting approval. Hyde Park teemed with London's fashionable set. Carriages circled, pedestrians strolled, and eyes lingered on every detail: who rode with whom, what was worn, what might be implied. Eleanina's mother kept a running commentary on acquaintances and engagements, a social ledger disguised as conversation. But James steered the discussion elsewhere. "Miss Hartwell, I have been reading the Browning volume you recommended. His views on love are rather revolutionary." Eleanina brightened. "That marriage should be a partnership of minds as well as hearts, yes, remarkably modern." Her mother frowned at the seriousness of the subject, but James pressed on. "Too few young ladies form their own opinions of what they read. Yours are refreshing." For Eleanina, that fleeting moment of intellectual respect was worth more than all the whispered speculation of Hyde Park. Over the following weeks, their courtship unfolded with the rhythm expected of propriety: drawing-room visits twice weekly, a Saturday outing to a museum or concert, letters exchanged under parental supervision. In person, they were watched; in writing, they were free. James's letters soon grew bolder, not improper, but thoughtful, layered with literary allusions. Browning's By the Fireside, Eliot's Heroines, metaphors of libraries and gardens, each hinted at his vision of marriage as a union of intellect and affection. Eleanina replied in kind, her words carefully veiled yet unmistakably sympathetic. Their correspondence became the true heart of their courtship. But another man hovered at the edges, Mr. Darlington. Persistent, insinuating, he lingered at social gatherings, secured unwanted dances, and asked far too many questions about James's affairs. Servants whispered of his inquiries. His tone grew mocking, his interest unsettling. The tension came to a head at a gallery exhibition. Confronting them with feigned casualness, Darlington dropped pointed remarks about James's property in Derbyshire, then slyly alluded to rumours concerning his Liverpool investments. The impropriety of such public insinuations was scandal enough, but worse was the doubt it planted. Eleanina's parents spoke in hushed tones that night. Her father trusted his prior inquiries into James's affairs, yet her mother urged further investigation. In Victorian society, marriage was above all a financial transaction. The faintest whiff of instability could end a promising match. James answered swiftly. His next letter dismissed Darlington's rumours and promised full transparency, but it also hinted at urgency. He would not allow innuendo to poison their future. He would speak to her father at once, and make his final intentions known. The appointed morning dawned grey and rainy, the weight of uncertainty pressing heavily upon Elelonina. At 11, James arrived. With a reassuring glance toward the drawing room, he entered her father's study. The house fell silent. Minutes dragged like hours. At last the door opened, and both men emerged smiling. Her father, twinkle-eyed, announced, "Mr. Thornfield has something he wishes to discuss with Elelonina." With the door open, of course. Left together, James revealed all: Darlington's gambling debts, his designs upon Elelonina's dowry, and the proof that had convinced her father. Darlington's attentions had been rooted not in affection, but in desperation. With that unpleasantness laid to rest, James produced a velvet box. Inside gleamed a sapphire ring, modest yet elegant. "Miss Hartwell, Elelonina," he said, his voice steady yet warm, "would you do me the very great honor of becoming my wife?" Her answer was simple, but full of certainty. Yes. Within days, the engagement was formally announced in the Morning Post. Elelonina's world transformed, new freedoms, new preparations, a trousseau assembled under her mother's direction. Thornfield Hall prepared for her arrival. Letters now gave way to daily visits, their affection sanctioned at last. For all its rules and rigid structures, Victorian courtship had led them here, not merely to a prudent arrangement, but to a partnership grounded in intellect, mutual esteem, and quiet devotion. Theirs had been a high-stakes game of rumor, propriety, and family judgment. But against all odds, love, expressed through letters, gardens, and libraries, had won. In the summer of 80 CE, Rome prepared for a spectacle unlike any the empire had ever seen. At the heart of the city rose the newest jewel of Flavian power, the Colosseum. A vast amphitheater of stone and concrete, it towered where Nero's artificial lake had once sprawled, transforming a site of imperial indulgence into a monument for the Roman people. Titus, son of Vespasian and newly emperor, had promised the amphitheater would belong to the citizens of Rome. Now he intended to prove it. A proclamation declared 100 days of games, 100 days of combat, theater, feasting, and blood. To Romans, it was more than generous. It was breathtaking. The Colosseum itself was as much a marvel as the promise it carried. Seating more than 50,000, its tiered structure reflected Rome's rigid hierarchy: senators in carved marble seats nearest the arena, equestrians in the middle tiers, and the common poor pressed into the highest rows. For once, all Rome, from patrician to plebeian, would witness the same spectacle, united under the gaze of their emperor. The timing was no accident. Titus had inherited the throne beneath dark omens: a fire that scarred the city, a plague that thinned its population, and the eruption of Vesuvius that had buried Pompeii and Herculaneum. Rumors of discontent whispered through Rome. These inaugural games were more than entertainment. They were political theater, a display of generosity and power meant to turn disaster into triumph. The city pulsed with anticipation. Merchants prepared stalls, gladiators sharpened their blades, and exotic beasts were herded into pens. Engineers fine-tuned the hidden mechanisms that would astonish the crowds with sudden appearances and staged illusions. Families could speak of little else. Children boasted of monsters they expected to see, while veterans dreamed of naval battles recreated upon the flooded arena floor. For Titus, the amphitheater was more than stone. It was memory, legacy, and power. For the Roman people, it was a gift forged from conquest and labor, and soon to be consecrated by the roar of lions and the cries of men. On the morning of the inaugural games, Rome awoke in a fever of excitement. Citizens flooded the streets, streaming toward the gleaming new amphitheater whose arches blazed in the rising sun. Vendors shouted their wares: figs, nuts, honeyed wine, while beggars pleaded for scraps, hoping the day's generosity might reach them as well. The Colosseum swallowed the multitudes like a living thing, its 4 tiers channeling the throng into place. Inside, the air vibrated with energy. Senators reclined on polished marble, their purple-bordered togas marking their rank. The equestrians filled the middle rows. Above them, plebeians and slaves crowded shoulder to shoulder, their faces lifted toward the arena floor. The Colosseum, not yet baptized in blood, throbbed with promise. Rome was ready. Despite their differences in rank and wealth, all eyes turned toward the same stage, the vast oval of sand at the center of the Colosseum, pristine and waiting. The architecture itself magnified the moment, every voice carried, every cheer reverberated against the stone. Then came the emperor. Titus entered in procession, preceded by lictors bearing fasces and flanked by guards glittering in polished armor. The crowd erupted in thunderous applause. For Titus, this was more than ceremony, it was theater, a calculated display of imperial generosity. When he raised his hand in greeting, the cheers swelled into a deafening roar, the people's loyalty offered back as tribute. The games began. Trumpets blared, dancers whirled across the sand, and priests made solemn sacrifices to Jupiter and Mars. The air thickened with incense, mingling with the musk of animals caged beneath the arena floor. Above, the velarium, a vast awning stretched by sailors of the Roman fleet, unfurled across the sky. Its colored panels shifted with the breeze, casting rippling light over the audience. Titus spared no extravagance. Food and coins were scattered into the stands, sparking scrambles as plebeians lunged for imperial bounty. Some said the emperor himself hurled wooden balls into the crowd, each inscribed with prizes, slaves, livestock, even luxury goods redeemable after the games. The Colosseum was no mere amphitheater, it was a machine of awe, designed to overwhelm the senses. And this was only the first day. When the ceremonies ended, the arena revealed its true purpose. Trumpets sounded, the gates swung wide, and the first gladiators marched onto the sand. Bronze helmets gleamed, shields shone with fresh paint, and blades caught the sunlight like fire. They saluted the emperor, raising their weapons high, and the roar that followed shook the foundations. Gladiators were more than fighters. They were symbols of Rome's might. Some were slaves or prisoners of war, condemned to survive or die in spectacle. Others were volunteers, gambling their lives for wealth and fame. On this day, every type stood ready, the heavily armed Murmillo with sword and shield, the agile Retiarius with net and trident, the relentless Secutor with smooth helmet and short blade. The sand quickly became a stage of living drama. A Retiarius cast his net, ensnaring a Secutor, only to see it slashed apart in a spray of threads before the killing blow fell. Elsewhere, 2 Murmillos clashed like armored titans, each strike ringing like hammer on an anvil. Blood darkened the sand, and with it rose the frenzy of the crowd. They gestured wildly, demanding mercy or death, their verdict shown in the turn of a thumb. Yet the games were never only about death. They were theater. Gladiators trained not merely to kill, but to entertain, to draw out combat, heighten suspense, and play to the audience. A man who fought bravely, though wounded, might win reprieve. One who faltered or begged often met a swift end. The crowd loved courage, despised weakness, and Titus watched closely, gauging how each display reflected upon his reign. The duels came in waves, each pair stirring the amphitheater to new frenzies. Between battles, attendants raked the sand, scattering flowers and spices to mask the iron scent of blood. For Rome, the Colosseum was not a slaughterhouse but a stage, and its actors wrote their parts in flesh and steel. By the end of the first round, the arena was baptized. The once pristine sand lay crimson, the walls heavy with the echoes of cheers and screams. The message was unmistakable: this amphitheater belonged to Rome, and its soul would be forever nourished by blood. If gladiators gave the drama of man against man, the hunts, venations, would soon bring a different wonder altogether. On the second and third days of the inaugural games, the gates opened not for armored men, but for creatures Rome had dragged from the farthest edges of its empire. From the dark cages below erupted lions whose roars rattled the stone walls, panthers gliding low across the sand, elephants adorned in foreign trappings, and even crocodiles and ostriches marched out for display. These beasts had been shipped across seas, driven through deserts, and herded along Roman roads for a single purpose: death on the sands of the new amphitheater. Facing them were the venators, hunters trained for such combat. With spears, bows, and nets, they relied on agility and cunning rather than brute force. The crowd thundered approval as one hunter sidestepped a charging bull and struck it cleanly in the flank, or when another vaulted over a leopard mid-lunge to drive his blade home. Each kill was not just sport, it was proof of Rome's dominion over nature itself. Not all contests were fair. Sometimes animals were pitted against one another, bears against bulls, lions against tigers, while the crowd shrieked and cheered at the chaos. At other times, condemned criminals were hurled into the arena, left to be torn apart as punishment for their crimes. To the state, it was justice; to the crowd, it was another layer of spectacle, a brutal reminder of Rome's absolute power. To heighten the illusion, scenery transformed the Colosseum into painted forests or makeshift deserts. Herds of deer and antelope were released into these landscapes, only to be cut down in coordinated hunts by archers. For most spectators, men and women who had never traveled beyond Italy, this was their first glimpse of lions, elephants, or strange birds from distant lands. In the Colosseum, the empire itself was put on parade, its conquered creatures and exotic wonders humbled in the dust of Rome. This was more than entertainment. It was propaganda. Rome ruled not only men, but the natural world itself. And still, Titus had more marvels to unveil. On select days of the 100-day festival, the impossible happened: the Colosseum became a sea. Ingenious engineering, hidden sluices and aqueducts, flooded the arena floor, transforming sand into shimmering waves. The crowd gasped as ships drifted into view, their sails furled, their painted prows glinting in the sunlight. These were no mere toys, but scaled warships, crewed by real men armed with oars, spears, and bows. Criminals and prisoners of war often filled these crews, forced to fight in mock sea battles called naumachii. Each performance reenacted history or legend: Greeks clashing with Persians, Phoenicians battling Romans, wood splintering as ships rammed, arrows flying over the spray. From their seats, spectators felt as though the empire's great victories unfolded again before their eyes. The fighting was savage. Ships capsized, men were hurled into the water, clawing at broken timbers as they drowned beneath the gaze of 50,000. Unlike gladiators, whose bravery might win mercy, the men of the naumachii rarely survived. The water became their grave. But for the crowd, danger was the very heart of the spectacle. To watch a sea fill the Colosseum, to see empires clash in miniature, was to taste the impossible. With each display, Titus elevated himself in the eyes of his people. Only Rome could command such wonders, and only a Roman emperor could summon them into being. When the water was finally drained and the arena returned to sand, the people knew they had witnessed something no other city on earth could match. The Colosseum was no longer merely a theater of blood. It was Rome itself made flesh, its conquest, its ingenuity, its audacity, etched forever into stone and sand. Blood stained the sand, but the Colosseum was more than a theater of violence. It was a theater of worlds. Titus knew that bread and wine mattered as much as blood, and so the 100 Days of Games were matched with banquets and public feasts that transformed Rome into a single vast dining hall. For days on end, the empire's wealth was poured into the bellies of its people. The streets around the amphitheater overflowed with vendors distributing loaves of bread, fruit, and roasted meats, all at the emperor's expense. Amphorae of wine were opened freely, their sharp sweetness drifting on the breeze. Citizens drank deeply, raising toasts to Titus as they blessed his generosity. In a society where famine was never far from memory, abundance itself was spectacle. For the poor, the sudden plenty was as dazzling as any gladiatorial duel. Inside the Colosseum, food became part of the performance. Between bouts, attendants hurled baskets of figs, dates, and nuts into the stands. Wooden balls inscribed with prizes were tossed into the crowd, redeemable for treasures ranging from hams to slaves. Children scrambled for them while grown men grappled in the aisles. Each ball was a physical token of imperial bounty. The elite dined differently. Senators and equestrians feasted in shaded porticos, savoring dishes imported from Rome's farthest provinces, flamingo tongues from Africa, fish sauces from Hispania, spices carried over deserts from Arabia. For the common people, the fare was simpler, but the message was the same. Their emperor fed his city as lavishly as he entertained it. The feasts were more than indulgence. They were politics. Titus had inherited an empire scarred by disaster, fire, plague, famine, and the eruption of Vesuvius. Suspicion shadowed his reign, and the inaugural games were his chance to bind the people's loyalty with the oldest bond of all, gratitude for survival. Every loaf, every cup of wine reminded Rome that its emperor stood at the center of a world empire, drawing grain from Egypt, oil from Africa, wine from Gaul, and spices from the East. Rome did not merely eat, it consumed the empire itself. Yet amid the feasting and games, another spectacle darkened the arena: executions. These were not quiet punishments, but public performances staged with the grandeur of theater. Condemned criminals, rebels, and slaves were marched before tens of thousands to face death as entertainment. Some were thrown unarmed to lions or panthers, their screams drowned by the roars of beasts. Others were forced into hopeless duels with crude weapons, their struggles clumsy parodies of true gladiators. Titus' inaugural games, however, turned executions into myth. The condemned were cast into roles from legend: Orpheus torn apart by beasts as he played his lyre, or Icarus hoisted aloft on makeshift wings before plunging to his death. Punishment became performance, justice became spectacle. The crowd was enthralled. To them, these deaths were more than cruelty, they were lessons in power, reminders that Rome's authority reached even into myth. Such spectacles served many purposes. They purged criminals, affirmed imperial justice, and reinforced the emperor's control over life and death. But they also fed the darker appetite of the masses. Roman satirists would later condemn the bloodlust of the people, but in those 100 days, their cheers left no doubt. Executions thrilled as much as hunts or duels. Beneath it all lay a single truth. The inaugural games were not merely entertainment, they were propaganda. Titus understood that spectacle was currency, and he spent it lavishly. Gladiatorial duels, exotic hunts, feasts, executions, and even naval battles were orchestrated not only to amaze, but to reshape his image. His father, Vespasian, had built the Colosseum by tearing down Nero's hated palace. Now Titus made it Rome's gift, its theater, its heart. In the stands, senators and slaves alike gazed upon the same sand, shouted the same cries, and felt themselves united beneath their emperor's gaze. The results were undeniable. Where suspicion had shadowed Titus at the start of his reign, adoration now followed him. His generosity erased the memory of famine and plague. His spectacles transformed him from untested ruler to beloved benefactor. Ancient writers claimed no emperor had ever been more loved, and much of that love was born in the shadow of the Colosseum. Yet the triumph was fleeting. Titus reigned scarcely 2 years before his sudden death in 81 CE, leaving his brother Domitian to inherit the dynasty. But the Colosseum endured, and with it the memory of those 100 days. In stone and sand, Titus carved his legacy, not as a conqueror, but as the emperor who gave Rome its greatest spectacle. By the time the festival ended, the Colosseum was no longer just a building. It had become the beating heart of the empire. In its first 100 days, the amphitheater had contained every extreme of Roman life: courage and cruelty, generosity and gluttony, justice and spectacle. Families returned to their cramped homes with stories of lions and elephants, of gladiators who fought like heroes from legend, of ships clashing upon waters where sand had once lain. Children reenacted the duels in the streets, playing Murmillo and Retiarius, as if the empire's glory had poured directly into their games. The Colosseum had been baptized in blood, crowned with feasts, and immortalized with myth. It stood as Rome itself, its triumphs and its terrors bound together in 100 unforgettable days. Poets and historians preserved the memory of Titus's festival, their words ensuring that centuries later the echoes of that summer would still be heard. Yet the games were more than entertainment. They were Rome itself, distilled into spectacle. The Colosseum proclaimed to the world that no other civilization could rival Rome's wealth, manpower, and ingenuity. Every exotic beast slain, every myth reenacted, every prize cast into the crowd was proof of an empire that bent nature and nations to its will. For one season, Rome placed its mastery of man, beast, and the elements on triumphant display. The amphitheater reshaped the city's life. From that moment forward, it became Rome's stage for triumph and terror alike. Future emperors would strive to match Titus's generosity, but none could eclipse the first festival. To attend games in the Colosseum became a civic ritual, a binding act of Roman identity. Loyalty itself could rise or fall within those stone walls. Titus did not live long to savor his triumph. He died in 81 CE, scarcely 2 years into his reign. Yet history remembered him as a rare emperor beloved for his generosity, his brief rule shining brighter for the shadows it overcame. That affection was born, above all, in the 100 days of blood and feasting he had given to his people. The inaugural games were not merely a festival. They were Rome in its purest form, brutal, magnificent, excessive, unforgettable. And even now, in the arches of the Colosseum where 50,000 voices once thundered, that legacy lingers still.